There's no doubt that The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is a complete masterpiece, but it definitely had some issues, namely unresolved storylines in Breath of the Wild. In today's video, I would like to talk about The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and 10 storylines that were never explained. Now, what timeline is Breath of the Wild actually set in? The biggest question that most people have when it comes to Breath of the Wild is the timeline that it's in. Now, out of the 3 timelines, the Downfall timeline, the Child timeline, and the Adult timeline, the only timeline that actually makes the most sense is the Downfall timeline, since the game takes place way into the future. However, there are still several gray areas when it comes to Breath of the Wild's placement in the timeline. Now, there are several questions that come up, with the next entry on the list discussing one such conundrum. Now, how are the KOROKS, ZORAS, and RITOS existing together? The Zelda franchise clearly specifies that the Kokiri race evolved into KOROKS so that they could travel the Great Sea. However, the ZORAS are apparently also evolved into the RITOS, since the Great Sea was a harsh place to live for water-dwelling life, forcing them to evolve for their own safety. Now, keeping this logic in mind, how is it any at all possible that all of these 3 races are somehow living together in Breath of the Wild? Nintendo has to provide some serious explanations in the sequel to Breath of the Wild if they wish to satiate hardcore Zelda fans. The next question I have is, why is Link the only champion who didn't receive a Divine Beast? All 4 champions in Breath of the Wild receive a Divine Beast to pilot so that they can fight Ganon when his threat becomes way too big to ignore. However, if that is the case, then Link should have also received a Divine Beast of his own to aid in his fight against Ganon as well. After all, Link was so weak before his coma that one Guardian Laser was enough to send him packing. A Divine Beast could have evened the playing field and maybe even won against Ganon 100 years back. How does the Blood Moon revive mechanical enemies like the Guardians, for example? Now, the Blood Moon is an interesting occurrence in Breath of the Wild, serving as a great narrative structure to revive enemies and balance out the game, kind of. However, there's one questionable aspect to the Blood Moon that kind of warrants a better explanation, namely the fact that the Guardians are also revived by the power of Ganon. Now, how does any of this make sense? After all, Guardians aren't organic beings, so it would be somewhat of a stretch to assume that Ganon personally came to make the Guardians back from scratch. This is a notion that is equal hilarious and impossible. Why was NAYDRA the only dragon infected by Calamity Ganon? Now, out of the 3 elemental dragons present in the game, it seems that only NAYDRA was the one stupid enough to be caught by Ganon. Or is there more to this story? After all, we've seen the dragon escape into a portal where Link shaves a part of their body. To assume that only NAYDRA was the slowest of the bunch would be a very convenient explanation. Perhaps there's more to the story than meets the eye, but unfortunately, Nintendo, we will never know. Now, why can't Link enter Gerudo Town freely after ending Vanabra's threat? Now, we understand the limitations of Gerudo Town, not allowing any men, or though as they call it in the game, to enter the settlement. However, the amount of time and effort that Link invests into saving the town from Vanabras should have been rewarded with a free pass into the city, in my opinion, if nothing else. Something that has been replicated in the previous Zelda games. Now, an example of this is in Ocarina of Time, where once you fight all of the Gerudos, you actually get a pass and you're actually able to freely come in and out without the guards catching you. So now, instead of Link having to wear a disguise if he wants to enter the town, which is just plain stupid, if the town can allow a male Goron to enter the city, then a hero like Link should also receive the same welcome. Again, just my opinion. Is Link attracted to anybody in the game? Link being a mute protagonist is a personality trait that the Legend of Zelda series has maintained since the beginning. His feelings are something that is very much kept quiet in the game, especially for the 2 women in his life who clearly had feelings for him, Mipha and Zelda. Only one can wonder if Link was oblivious to their attraction or kept his feelings about them bottled up for the longest time. I actually talked about Link actually saying things in another video. I'll put that in the eye right above this video if you want to check that out. Now, how in the world was Zelda keeping Ganon in check for 100 years? The 100-year stalemate between Zelda and Ganon is something that is pretty well documented in Breath of the Wild. However, the logistics of these are something that isn't explained very well. Now we find out at the end of the game that the elusive Triforce is exactly what Zelda uses to seal Ganon for good. However, is it really that? Is the power of Triforce, out of which Zelda should only have one wisdom piece, enough to push Ganon back for so long? And that's not the only gripe when it comes to this battle. Why did Zelda not age during this period? We understand that Hylians are some of the most resilient beings in the Legend of Zelda series, but even their body has to have its limits. To see Zelda completely normal at the end of the game without even aging a bit is definitely somewhat suspect. There's no logical explanation as to how she managed to retain her youth after such a long time. If anything, the fight to restrain Ganon should have been incredibly taxing on her body, and yet she seems virtually unaffected by the process. Finally, how did the Guardians defeat Link? For a person so well versed in combat, it must be said that the manner in which Link was disposed of by the Guardians is honestly quite pathetic. After all, pre-coma Link was supposed to be a resilient being, which makes it quite suspect that a single Guardian laser beam was enough to take him out of commission. Now, while we understand that a Guardian attack is incredibly damaging, Link is in his prime and he easily should have been able to tank out at least one shot. So there you have it, my friends. There's 10 storylines that I feel that weren't really explained very well in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Let me know what you guys thought about this video and the 10 things that we talked about. If you found value in today's video, be sure to click the playlist coming up on the screen here in a few to check out another Zelda video. And if you are new here, take a minute to subscribe for weekly Zelda content. Continue to be that light in somebody's life, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.